Welcome to the Good Faith Podcast with your host, Curtis Chang. And the Good Faith Podcast is a production of Redeeming Babel. And it's where we gather with friends who follow Jesus, and together we're helping each other make sense of the world. And joining me today is very good friend, Andy Crouch, who's going to help us make sense of a very important topic that often is neglected in this world, and it's the topic of rest. So Andy, thank you so much for joining us.
It is a pleasure to be back.
And we actually, it's not only a pleasure, but it's a rare opportunity because Andy is about to go offline for quite some time on an extended sabbatical. So we thought we're going to miss Andy for at least until next year. So this is a long sabbatical Andy is taking and shows his commitment to a very serious practice of rest, which is his particular form is a sabbatical. Now, we may not all be able to take extended sabbaticals, certainly as long as this, and I'm sure Andy will talk about that. But the underlying value that drives Andy, and he'll talk about this, I think is rest, is the call to rest. And so that's really the topic for today. How do we make sense of rest in what feels often like a restless world? So Andy, get us started. How should we think about rest? And then tell us how you're making sense of it.
Oh, man. Well, I suppose we should start at the very beginning because really among the extraordinary innovations of the Hebrew Bible's account of creation is this idea that rest is built into the fabric of creation and of the creator's activity in creating, which is, as far as I know, absolutely novel and unprecedented among the creation literature of the world that Genesis was written in and written for and written from. And, it's not just that we have this kind of extraordinary statement on day 7 that after 6 days of creating, the Lord had finished all his work and now rested on the 7th day. But it's also this pattern of day and night that at the end of every day, God finishes his work for the day and sees what he's made and it's good. And then it's evening. And apparently, the Bible certainly does not envision that God's like, whoa, I'm really worn out. I'm glad I got a break. There's no need for the creator to stop. In fact, another strain of our theology says it's only because God keeps kind of breathing creation into life through his Holy Spirit that the whole thing even keeps going. So, when we don't imagine this God, this creator God needing to rest, and yet there's this pattern, a daily pattern, then a weekly pattern, right? That's built into the very story of how the world came to be. And of course, it's picked up in the Bible as a template for how human lives ought to be. And that also was completely innovative because the ancient world knew no such thing as a day of rest, especially if you were not a person of leisure or privilege or kind of at the very apex of the food chain. And here's this command, right in the 10 Commandments, not just you rest, but your maidservant rests, your manservant rests, everybody in your household rests, really effectively everybody in your community rests, the animals rest, like everything rests for a day, a week. So it's a more important topic than I think we realize, and certainly more important than we seem to live out. Those of us who are not Jewish or not practicing kind of the Torah-shaped version of this, often it's just an unfamiliar topic, to be totally honest, in kind of our modern world.
Well, let's unpack that because I think that's really interesting about the context in which this is a kind of unique contribution of the Judeo and then Judeo-Christian sort of ethic. It's this notion that rest is built into who God is and also who human beings are meant to be. And I'm struck especially because, of course, we believe Genesis was received by the Jewish people in a period of when they were in captivity. It was written both as they're reflecting on their experience as slaves in Egypt, and then most scholars believe they are essentially in captivity in a form of slavery in the Babylonian captivity as well. And then, as you said, all the other ancient Near East creation myths are all written to justify really basically slavery narratives of where people have to work constantly. So there's something subversive going on, it seems to me, about sneaking in, not just sneaking in, like inserting in rest as built into the fabric of the creator of creation and the created beings who reflect the creator. So what's going on there? Why is there this seeming subversion of this imperative to keep people working at all times?
Well, I guess there's a couple directions to go with that. Like you could go in a sort of political direction, or you could even read it as a kind of subversive text, the complaint of people who are made to work all the time. But if you really take Scripture seriously, it offers a true account of what kind of is required to make a good world, right? And also an account of what has made a not good world, the world that we actually find ourselves in the midst of. And I think we maybe need to take this word creation more seriously because, if you are just talking about production, rest is just an interruption. If you're producing stuff, if you're just making stuff or making more stuff, if you're thinking in industrial sense or even agricultural sense, like making stuff happen, and anyone who's ever, been involved in gardening or farming knows, like, the plants grow every day. Taking a day off doesn't mean the weeds stop growing. So there's work to be done every day. And so if you're just in production mode, there's no reason to rest except that you get tired. And if you have enough power, you can take a break, and other people keep working, whether they're tired or not, whether they want to or not. But what if what we're about is actually speaking things into being from nothing? I'm not exactly saying that's creating. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that human beings do it that same way God does, but we are in the image of God. In the image of God, He created them. Well, what is creating? It's actually to bring something into being that has not been before. And for this, the Bible seems to say, and actually I think our own experience confirms, you actually need creation to be bracketed by what I might call contemplation. So the very first thing we learn in Genesis 1, when the world is without form and void, is that the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, which is a very interesting phrase. I don't know all of what it was intended to mean even, but even before God speaks, God's hovering. And I take this to be the pause that interrupts production and allows for creation. That is, when you ask me a question, even if it's a question I kind of think I know the answer to, and unless we're in a very mechanical kind of system where it's just my job to give you, like, what's 2 + 2, 4, what's 5 + 3, 8, I pause before I answer. And what am I doing while I'm pausing? I'm contemplating you, ideally, at least, I'm contemplating you, your question, my situation, my initial instinct, the people who will be listening. And I'm waiting until I have some sense that I have something, actually appropriate to offer here, rather than just producing an answer. And in a grand way, or kind of ultimate cosmic way, the Bible says the very first thing God does before He acts is hovers. So that's the contemplation before creation. But then every day there's this moment of evaluation, which is actually, is what I made good? Well, God in Genesis has the sort of advantage, I suppose, being perfectly good, that when every day He's like, it's good, it's good. For us, it's a more complex thing. At the end of this podcast, we'll shut it off and we won't be able to help ourselves. We'll have an evaluation moment. But I actually think deep creativity requires a contemplation beyond evaluation. And that's the rest. That's the overnight rest. So the whole picture is contemplation, action, evaluation, contemplation. And if you do anything seriously creative, if you write a letter, if you write a sermon, if you write a song, if you make a work of art, if you set out even to make something as simple as a chair that's not just following a total template, if you're not in production mode, you have to have contemplation first. Then you have to have these loops of action and evaluation. You do something, you evaluate it. But then actually central to the creative act is the contemplation beyond evaluation, which is not about was it good or not. It's just beholding it. And I do this as an author. I have my books on my desk, and every once in a while I pick one off my desk. I mean, they're done. They were done a long time ago. And I just open it up to a random page, and sometimes I read it aloud. It's strangely embarrassing to admit this, and it's not evaluating. It's too late. Like, the editor evaluated it. I evaluated it, right? You just came out with a book. Have you done this yet? Have you just contemplated the thing you made? I bet you have.
I have done that, and it's a complex experience of pride.
Because you're still in evaluation mode, right?
Right, pride, wins, joy, all of it. But I sometimes do get into the contemplation mode, and it does actually lead me to gratitude and worship. Like, wow, how did this happen? How did this set of thoughts come into being? And I think about the life experiences that went even before the starting of the writing of the book, and God working through my life to lead to this cultural product. But you're right. There's a deeper appreciation of how God made me, of who God is, of my relationship with God, that happens if I'm willing to do that act of contemplation. So I think you're exactly right.
So like, I think what's really going on in Sabbath, and I want to come back to the enslavement aspect in a moment here, but what's really going on is this is the pattern of creation, not production. This is the pattern of creativity. And we are the image bearers who are here in the world, not to make stuff ex nihilo in the material sense. We work with the world as given to us. And yet, as we put words together, as we put literal material together in new ways, we do make new realities that are meant to bring glory to God and be for the good of our neighbor. And to do that, you have to have rest. Now, when you are enslaved, your dignity as an image bearer and as a creator is taken away. The job of an enslaved person is merely to implement the productive wishes of the person or system that enslaves them. And you are robbed of creativity, and along with that, or I don't know which comes first, but you're robbed of rest. And now the truly crazy twist in this story is that we, thank goodness, in most of the world, we do not enslave people anymore in the literal legal sense. And it's illegal actually everywhere in the world, though it's still a practice in parts of the world. And you and I live, and most of our listeners will live, never having, felt that we were in danger of being enslaved in a legal sense. But most people in our world today, though we have less need for kind of effort in most of our jobs, we have less rest. I mean, we live with less rest than our ancestors could have imagined. Like, we live a completely restless life with no time for hovering, no time for glad contemplation. And one way I sometimes talk about it is we are caught, for one thing, we're caught in that action evaluation loop. Like, we're just acting and evaluating constantly rather than bracketing it with contemplation. But we're also caught, instead of a rhythm of work and rest, in a cycle of toil and leisure. And leisure is not the same thing as contemplation. It's not the same thing as rest. And so we actually live with a lot of leisure in our world. Anyone who has time to listen to a podcast, in one sense, has a certain measure of leisure. But leisure is not the same thing as rest.
Okay, let's put a pin on that one, because I really want to dive into that that distinction. I think it's a critical one. But let's help our listeners connect some, I think, very important observations you're making to their own situation, because we've illustrated it even just now as, well, what it was like to write a book and contemplate a book. Well, most people are not creatives in the sense of they're writing a book, or they're an artist, or they're creating a film or something like that. Most people feel like their lives are in production mode, they're working for a corporation, that they are producing something, or they have to get a report out and so forth. And I actually think what you're talking about may actually resonate with them on the problem side, because I do think I hear people say about, like, yeah, I am enslaved to my email. I am enslaved to Slack. I am enslaved to my production cycle. Like, we're in we're caught in this deadline trap or something like that. So I think that people actually probably do experience more of a sense of not legal slavery, but technological or functional de facto slavery. So helps to talk to those people who are living that lives where they think, like, I'm being paid to produce, and my boss is not legally enslaving me, but I have all sorts of technological shackles on me, and job shackles on me. What is the promise of rest mean for somebody in that situation?
So good and so real. And I guess I have two lines of thought. I mean, the first is, if you really do live or if you work, really more to the point, not live, but work in an environment that only treats you as a production factor and only ratchets in the direction of greater output in less time, you do live, I mean, it may not be legal slavery, but you live in an unjust system, a system that is not treating you like a person. And that it's wrong. And it is wrong. Like the world of work, the way work gets done in our modern world, with the great irony that we have all this technology that we were told was going to make our lives easier, just heightens the irony. But the reality stays the same. It's extractive, it's exploitative, it's unjust. It does not treat people like persons. And lots of people have jobs, and all of our work to some extent partakes in that. And to be clear, I'm not saying that production isn't part of good work. Producing things, I mean, even writing a book, at some point you have to sit down and pound out the words, and there is a production element, a productive element. Action evaluation is part of it. And for us, it's not just saying things like God says, and it's so, but we work with our bodies, we work with our minds. So that's not wrong. It's just when you are forced into just that loop and someone else is maximizing your output without giving you room for creativity. So it's unjust. You should pray and work for it to be changed. We all know the limits of change to unjust systems, but we also know unjust systems do change. And Israel lived with a different ethic under the thumb of empires, but those empires are gone. And Israel's ethic is still here to inspire us and shape how we're imagining. So the arc of history is long, but don't give up on the justice you are due as whatever kind of work you are, a barista, a software engineer, an actuary, whatever. If your system is unjust, pray for God to set you free like he set Israel free. I think the other thing we can do, though, is realize a lot of us have a certain amount of agency to re-inject the human into our work. So we have to choose. The system around us may not help us with this, but we have to kind of, in a sense, practice or discipline ourselves to contemplate before we act. So say you're working at Starbucks and there's a long line of people, all of them want your latte, none of them really care who you are. You don't have to stop caring who they are. You can interject a moment of contemplation when that next customer steps forward. Here's a human being. Here's an image bearer. Starbucks has tried to actually, another reality is Starbucks talks one way and acts another. So the theory behind Starbucks was, well, ask for their name. The barista will know your name. Well, but then you realize, but then they built these drive-thrus where no one's ever going to learn anyone's name. Like the companies themselves, are in a tension between their stated ideals, which were our partners, our associates, whatever euphemism they use for our nearly enslaved workers. We want to give each customer the date. Well, they're actually out of one side of their mouth, they're asking you to do that. On the other side, they're giving you labor practices that make it very hard. But you have a choice in that moment whether to just give into the machine or actually to say, I'm going to contemplate. Before I make this next espresso, I'm going to contemplate. It doesn't mean hours. It means a moment where you are not under the thumb of the production machine. So Same thing when Slack messages come in. Same thing when I sit down to check my email. Like I can choose whether I get caught up in production or I decide I'm going to contemplate before I act. And when I'm done, rather than going right to the next task, I'm going to contemplate after I act. Does that make sense? I mean, does that seem realistic?
I think it does, but I'm going to ask you to get even one more level, more practical. Like, say you're a coder or you are an engineer or you're a lawyer. What does it mean to build in contemplation both before and after a productive act? Before you actually, what would that look like for them to contemplate in the midst of work?
Well, those actually strike me as easy things, because in any domain like that, if your job is not about to be taken away by ChatGPT, the whole reason you are there is you bring creative insight to problems that are not absolutely routine. Like we can automate away the routine stuff, and in all those fields, many, many routine things are automated. You're a lawyer, you need to draft a will. I mean, there are templates, right? And the templates do like 90% of the drafting. But your job is attending, but wait, who's this person? whose estate I'm going to help them plan for. They're different from the last client and the next. So it's basically, I actually think anyone in those jobs is doing this as part of their job. But I think what makes it contemplation is a mysterious quality of not being hurried, of restfulness. And I will tell you two things. I have met people in literally every one of those fields you mentioned, and many others, who were absolutely like driven by the clock, never could rest, toiling away, sometimes very high status, high compensation, sometimes not. And then I've met other people doing the exact same job. And when you're with them, you're like, oh, this is a person at rest. This is a person paying attention to me. This is a person not rushing. And yet they're doing the same technical job. And so a lot of it is how we choose to come into the world and the narratives we tell ourselves. And the other thing I'll say is the truth is advancing in all these fields requires greater and greater creativity. And that actually means greater and greater margins. Before you start a project, ask, what's the real purpose of this? What's the goal of this? When you end a project, what did we deeply learn from this? Not just did it work or not, which is the evaluation loop, and then actually the ability to celebrate it, which is the contemplation after action, is like a massive input of energy for yourself and anyone else you work with into the next hard thing. And if you skip that, you end up burned out, unproductive, actually. Like this is a path to productivity as well as creativity, actually.
It's so interesting, Andy, 'cause it makes me feel like the mode that we can get trapped in, that I know I get trapped in, is I can only rest after I get all my work done. So the way to rest is to get all of your work done as fast as possible. And so you're furiously working in the day to like check off things, get everything done. Because at the end is this beautiful promise of rest. But by then you're exhausted and fried that actually you can't actually rest. You can turn off, you can cease laboring, but that's not the same thing as rest, I think is what you're saying.
And that's actually when we turn to leisure, which is basically the purchase of a sensation of effortlessness, but it's always purchased from someone else who's working really hard. So I turn on the TV and I'm like, I just need some Netflix, right? But somebody is working really hard to deliver me all that Netflix. And what I'm not doing is gladly, restfully contemplating what I did that day. I'm trying to escape that rat race I was in today, but I actually employ someone else to give me, or I'm like, oh, we don't have time to cook, just DoorDash, right? And suddenly a whole bunch of workers in some ghost kitchen and somebody on a bike, if I'm in New York or whatever, works really hard. And I get to sit down, I'm like, oh, thank goodness I didn't have to cook. But it's not the same as working hard to make a meal and then sitting down and enjoying the meal and contemplating it and being like, oh, so glad we got to do this. So absolutely. And the secret to Sabbath is you'll never be done in time, and you'll never have it all done. I just started a sabbatical, as you mentioned, but I was up till midnight last night, because there were some things I was trying to deliver for the people who will care for them in my absence. And I still didn't get it all done. And that's what Sabbath is like every week. And it's just built in. And Abraham Joshua Heschel, in his amazing book on the Sabbath, tells this story of how important it is to reconcile yourself to the unfinishedness of your life. He tells the story of this guy who's out on the Sabbath taking a walk, presumably a short walk because you can't walk very far if you're an observant Jew, and sees a fence that he hasn't mended during the week. And he makes a mental note to himself, well, it's not the Sabbath, it's the Sabbath, so I'm not going to mend it today, but I'm going to come back and fix that part of the fence. And then as he's reflecting on it, he realizes just the thought of mending the fence was a kind of work. And so he decides, I am never going to mend that fence because I was violating the Sabbath thinking about mending it. Yeah. So, but it is this practice of saying, my life won't be done. When I die, like the ultimate rest, the last period of contemplation, it won't all be finished. And it's not finished Saturday night when I take Sunday off. And it's not finished on May 31st when I take 7 months off. It's just part of life. And actually accepting that is part of the gift. It's the grace. It's the grace of it. And it is so different from God as God or other people as our taskmaster who make us deliver. But that's not God, right? And was God actually done on day 6? Like the world, however we understand the state of the world, it's surely finished is not the right word, but he'd finished the work he needed to do for that for the making of this environment that now is filled with all these creatures, including his image bearers. So
yeah, I think this idea that rest is interwoven into the rhythm of work and creativity versus something that happens outside or after this is actually quite radical. But it is the rhythm of the Sabbath. The whole idea is that it's part of the rhythm. And I'm taking sort of a word here for myself, because I think I am still very much caught in the, like, I will work hard and cram in every moment of productivity, and really the invitation to carve out rest in the day itself to contemplate what I'm doing. I think you're absolutely right. Leads to productivity. I've been doing this new practice lately, also trying to build it into the practice of taking like real genuine breaks during the day, where I just take, like 10 minutes of contemplative prayer in the middle of the work, precisely to like be okay with that incompleteness and actually experience rest in the midst of incompletion. The other practice that I've been doing is also a practice of like the Lectio, but applied to your day, right? Just in the way in which we read the Lectio contemplatively. We read the Scripture contemplatively, and we're looking for where does God show up in the text. I've been doing this practice at the end of the day I don't do it every day, but the days I do it, I notice a difference where I basically am reading my day. I mean, some days I literally will pull up the schedule, my agenda of my
calendar?
day. My calendar, and I will read the events of the day. At 8 o'clock, I was on this podcast. At 9 o'clock, I was in this meeting. And actually read it contemplatively, asking God, where did you show up? Or, what do I need to confess? Where did I not show up?
I wish you had showed up, but I didn't feel like you did. All those things, right?
All of those things.
This is the literal examen, right, of the Jesuits. It's an amazing.
Yes.
Amazing,
I'm sorry. I should
beautiful.
say it's the examen. It is exactly the examen. It's the it's the Lectio applied to work, to your life's work, and that's exactly right. It's the examen. We're talking with Andy Crouch about the topic of rest. Andy, I want to go back to a distinction that you made earlier about the distinction between rest, true rest, and leisure. And one of the things you talked about was that when we're experiencing leisure, especially in our modern Western late capitalism era, it's really we're experiencing the work of somebody else. One reason somebody else is working very hard to deliver leisure to us, and it seems to me the other thing is that it's delivered as a commodity. It's delivered as a product, like this. It's Netflix. It's a show, or it's a vacation package. It's a tour. And there's something that it's handed to us. We purchase it, and it comes as in a prepackaged form. And I wonder if that notion of leisure packaged as a commodity actually is not deeply, deeply restful. It has the facsimile, it has the kind of the surface of rest, because it's not, we're not producing. So it seems like this is rest, but how many of us have left a packaged vacation experience, of some sort, more exhausted than ever, more tired from a vacation than ever? Or for me, after binge watching, I don't know, name a show. I'm all jangled Succession. I'm like depressed. I'm dark. I'm disturbed. I'm not exactly. I've been entertained, but I have not been restored in the sense of rest. So say more about that.
Oh, exactly. I mean, this is the like dual irony of leisure, which I had a good definition of it in my book, The Techwise Family. I don't have it like in front of me or ready to mind, but it's basically the sensation of inactivity purchased by the work, the toil of others, right? So the two ironies are, first, you're getting to rest, but somebody else is working really hard. You're sitting down to a nice meal at a restaurant, but back in the kitchen, people are working really hard, even if it's good work. It may be good work, but it's still work. So that you can't have everybody having leisure all the same time. Somebody's got to be working for somebody else to have leisure or toiling. But then the other deeper irony is, even for the alleged beneficiaries, it's so often strangely unrestful. We don't have a wonderful night's sleep after 4 hours of Netflix. Instead it's restless sleep. We're like jangly, right? And I'm hesitating here, contemplating, the other side of this is I have friends who legitimately love cruises. And to me, it just sounds horrible, but I know a cruise by this definition is like pure leisure. I mean, clearly it falls under the definition of leisure the way I'm defining it. Some people seem to like those things. I am in the David Foster Wallace school who wrote this essay about cruising called A Supposedly Fun Thing I Will Never Do Again. Whatever. But I think the deep principle here is if we are trying to escape, we will often find it is actually not that restful, whatever our escapist thing is. And I actually think my friends who like cruises, it's just a different personality type from mine, but the people who like it and who seem to come back healthy, go healthy and come back healthy, they actually have rhythms of work and rest, and they just also enjoy going on a cruise. But if you are trying to escape your life of production by purchasing this vacation package or whatever, I think you will find that it does not restore in the way that really stepping into the world of gift. I mean, you mentioned the commodification of these things, and arguably the kind of polar opposite of commodity is gift. And
Yeah.
when I receive, among other things, the work I've done for the day when it's over as a gift, rather than, wow, I'm so glad I made, X number of dollars so I can now spend X number of them on this leisure activity. But no, I'm now stepping away from all that. And the work I did was not the sum of the money I made for myself or other people. There was an element of gift in it, and I received that. And then I walk out, say, into my backyard or into even just out onto the street with the sky above me. And I'm part of a world that's not a commodity and that I'm not paying for. And, and then of course, to receive any of this ultimately requires spiritual practices, because we're not naturally grateful people. We're not naturally restful people. We don't naturally do that process of seeing where God is in all of it. But if we start doing that, we start to receive the world as gift, our work as gift. However good or bad our work is, there's an element of gift in it. And then we lie down and sleep. And I mean, this is the other thing our modern world is just totally missing, is what it actually feels like to get a good night's sleep. Many, many, many of us have no idea. And yet it was part of the rhythm of human life for a long time before we figured out how to keep the electric lights on and all of that.
Andy, I have a deep suspicion that the vast majority of people, including the vast majority of Christians, actually do not know what is restful for them, that they have been provided various commodities to purchase and to select from. If we are saying rest is a deep trait of the human person, it would follow that each of our patterns of rest are also deeply personal. It doesn't mean it's unique. I'm not saying that, but that it is, like you said, it is going to be different potentially by different people. That a cruise may actually be restful for some people, but not for you. And that then this notion of rest then is actually not just cessation of labor and instead consumption of another set of experiences that leave us tired at the end, but rather is deeply restorative. That involves a level of discernment and engagement with ourselves, with God, with the world, to actually discern, well, what is restful for me? Is it watching a night of Netflix? Is it going on a prepackaged vacation? How do we discern for ourselves what is restful? What are the cues we should be paying attention to? What are the traps that we want to avoid in discerning our own personal practices of rest?
Yeah, that's a very interesting line of thought, and I'm wrestling with it a little bit in the sense that from an Old Testament point of view, Hebrew Bible, Jewish point of view, there's nothing individual about the practice of rest. It's like no, there's a whole bunch of commandments, and then there's a whole bunch of rabbinic commentary on the commandments that this is how you do it, and everybody does it this way, right? Yeah. So it's actually very uniform. But I actually think the genius of that, I think there is something to what you're saying. Because my other thought as you were laying out that question is, well, you will never know until you have room, until you have a lack of work.
That's right.
And a lack of leisure, because the leisure fills up your attention, right?
It's a false fullness. Yeah.
Yes. You'll never know until you have quiet. And in order
Yeah.
to have quiet, you got to stop working. And you
Yeah.
can't, you can't, sit in your kind of
Yeah.
you can't sit in your kind of amped up state and think, oh, what would I like to do that would give me a little bit of relief? You got to get you got to get into the quiet, which the trick is that means getting into the anxiety. That someone I know wrote a book about this and knows a lot more about it than I do. But a big reason we avoid the quiet and the rest and the not work is that when we aren't working, anxieties and fantasies and just essentially all of our distorted thoughts are given sort of a rise and to
Absolutely.
consciousness. And it's
Yeah.
very distressing. And so like, well, I think I'll go back to email or TV or whatever and get away from that. And so it's hard to rest. And I know, so I'm stepping away from all kinds of things that are, among other things, a kind of medication for me from my deepest fears, longings, grievings, all the real stuff in my life. I medicate away by being very active, doing reasonably rewarding things, many of which people think I do very well. And it's very satisfying and people pay me money. And I'm about to step away from all that. And I build into my expectation there's going to be a lot of disorientation, actually a lot of distress. A lot of things are going to come up that I would rather didn't come up. And it's just part of the process. But on the other side of that is actual insight. And this is why I build in every 7 years, I, if necessary, quit my job because I've got to have enough time to hear not just, myself and God, of course. And you'll never have that. You'll never have any chance of hearing that unless you have rest deeply built into the rhythms of your life.
I love that, Andy. I think what you're saying is that rest, the practice of rest and being forced to cease from labor and make a decision, not forced, being invited to, but and also being invited to cease from a superficial filling of that void with leisure or entertainment can be actually quite diagnostic to what is actually our true spiritual state.
Exactly.
All right, Andy, I want to talk about, again, let's move into how people can actually start experimenting, growing, leaning into this. What would you advise somebody who's like, okay, you've convinced me, I need to find out what actually rest really feels like. I need to be willing to lean into some of the anxiety that's going to open up for me. How do you get started?
Well, I think I'd start with the unit of the day, probably. So I'd start with the end of the day and the beginning of the day. And, as dramatic as it is that I, for a while now in my adult life, have built in these big, long sabbaticals, which people are always like, how do you do that? I will say the spiritually most beneficial thing I did about 7 years ago now, maybe 5 years ago, it was decide not to pick up my phone in the mornings when I went downstairs. So first, get the phones out of the bedrooms. That's like baseline health.
Okay.
But then I would go downstairs, and the first thing I would do would be to pick up my phone. And I was like, this cannot possibly be the best way to start my day. So I started this practice that I have done, I think, literally every day, with maybe 3 exceptions where it was just truly unfeasible, for 5 years straight. Literally every day, the first thing I do after I make tea, which is a leisure item I am not willing to give up yet because I'm afraid of the anxiety it would unleash, I walk outside. I go outdoors and I stand outside, sometimes for several minutes, sometimes only for a few moments, especially if it's yucky weather or something. But I go outdoors, and it's both a very, very powerful thing to do in and of itself, and it also anchors a practice of ending my day, I would say, and beginning it without these kind of tools, either of productivity or leisure, which of course our smartphones are this devilish combination of both. Like, they're both your pathway to all your Slack messages and to all your Netflix. And but actually the kind of silver lining in that is, if you put it away, toil and leisure are both put away from you. Like your pathway to both is now out of reach. So work on, how am I ending my days? Do I have a little bit of space at the end of my days that's not filled with these distractions? And how am I beginning my days? And then I love your idea of a slightly more structured reflection or contemplation process. Think back through the day. What did it feel? What were the moments? I learned from your family something our family does all the time now: highs, lows, and did wells. Which is actually the examen just for children. What was a high in your day? Low in your day? What was a moment when you felt like you were really being who you were meant to be? Then I would work on weekly Sabbath because it is also extremely fundamental. I think in a way the Bible is so pre-modern that it can't imagine people would have to be told you should put away your phones and go to sleep. Like, so that's not a commandment. I mean, I just think ancient people couldn't imagine a world in which people just don't even sleep at night. But it does make very fundamental a weekly practice of a day of rest. And I just think that's essential. And the people I know who do it are so grateful and humble and happy people. Their lives are not perfect and they're not happy all the time, but their baseline is so different from people who don't. And I just want to say, like they say at AA, keep coming back. It works. Keep taking a day off every week and you will find good things will come, not prosperity in some mechanical sense, but like the good life is a life with that day off. It's the life as an image bearer of God. It's like your birthright to have that day.
Andy, I want to talk about that day because I do think you're absolutely right. It's a critical sort of breaker we put into from running off along the trail of hyper productivity.
Circuit breaker for idolatry is what I call Sabbath. It's a circuit
that's great.
breaker for
That's a great way to put
it.
it.
It throws the switch on all the idols. Yeah.
But what about give a little more guidance on that? Because I think people who say, well, I have 2 days off, but actually those weekend days are not actually restful. Again, they describe it as they're running around taking their kids to one practice or one sports game after another. They're shopping, getting this done. So what does a day of rest actually look like? And how does that work given people's constraints as parents, as people taking care of their parents, all of that.
Yeah, of course. Farmers the cows have to be milked every single day. Right. The cows are not taking Sunday off. So it's, first of all, it's a little complicated. And secondly, it's not legalistic for Christians and it's not the law for us in the way that it was for the Jewish people, But Rich Viotis has a great definition, and you should have him on to talk about this because he's so good on this. But I'm not going to reproduce it perfectly, but he says it's a day without shoulds, musts, or have tos, in which I give up anything that provides me status, significance, or it should begin with S, but it's something else, like compensation, and instead. Rest in glad enjoyment of God and others. Rich has a better, cleaner definition, but it's a day where all the stuff that I do to provide the things I need to exist in the world is set aside and replaced by glad contemplation of God and others. So that's the essence of it. Now, you immediately, as happened in the rabbinic tradition, and it happens anytime you start talking about Sabbath, people bring up all the edge cases. Well, and of course this happened to Jesus too. Like, well, I don't know, can you take your ox to water or something? There are big debates about this.
Can you heal a leper?
Yeah, right. So, and you add on top of that we live in the most unbelievably Sabbathless society. Given our resources, I mean, you can understand why a subsistence society has trouble with Sabbath, but why an abundant society like ours does shows the spiritual power, the spiritual darkness, really, that we're living in. And by the way, it didn't exist 2 generations ago. There were blue laws in the United States. Almost everybody had Sunday off, whether they were Christian or not. It was kind of a pain if you were Jewish because the Jews take Saturday off. But there was a culture within living memory of me that supported this, and it is gone. And it's gone because of mammon. And it is very legitimate to feel like there is no way to do this. Like our kids' soccer game is at 10 a.m. on Sunday, and I don't know how to solve all those things for you, but you've got to start resisting. You and your house have to start resisting. And it means you probably don't sign up for some of the things that require you to be out and about on that day of rest for your family. And the other thing I'll say is almost within a 5-minute drive of anyone listening to this podcast in the US, at least, there is a family who do this religiously because they are either modern Orthodox or conservative or Orthodox Jews. And there are people doing this every single week who are your neighbors. They're Jewish.
Yeah.
They don't do it on Sunday the way Christians have traditionally taken their day of rest, but it can be done. And how do they do it? They do it all together. They've got a community that helps them to do it. They've got a community that reinforces to them, this is actually obedience and this is the way for us of life. And then they do tons of preparation. So one of the things people bring up is, gosh, well, if I'm a mom at home, I still have to cook for my family. Ask a Jewish mom, what do you do? She cooks on Friday. Like, there's a lot of prep involved, and there's work involved because there's work in being human. But you work, but you also bear each other's burdens. Everybody knows Sabbath is coming. Everyone makes room. In traditional Judaism, the mother has a big role in all of this, but her role on the Sabbath is to lead the resting and the praying that begins the resting, and the family helps her, and they know mom has more of a burden, right? Does that help at least a little bit?
I think it does. Yeah. I love the fact that on all of these rhythms on the day, the week, that we can do this. I love this idea that it's not meant to be done alone. It was always a communal practice of rest.
Yeah.
And, what would it be like for a whole group of folks within your church, for instance, your small group, something to say,
exactly.
We're going to take the same Sabbath on the same day and gather together to share food we've prepared ahead of time. So it's less burden on each one of us. And let's use that day to enjoy one another and God, and contemplate with gratitude what we've done. I mean, there seems like there's all sorts of creative opportunities there. But it does seem like we need to be creative, which is the point that rest and creativity are intertwined. And even more so now, perhaps, ironically, creativity and rest are even more intertwined, precisely because to resist the idols of our day, we have to be that much more creative in structuring our days. So may that be so. Andy, have a great rest. And obviously we'll be in touch, but our listeners will have to wait to hear from you again. So thank you, Andy.
You bet. Thanks.